So, have you ever wondered why, despite your absolute best intentions, you still find yourself procrastinating on that massive project? Or, hitting the snooze button for the third time instead of actually hitting the gym? It is a universally frustrating struggle. We get this sudden burst of inspiration, we make these grand, sweeping declarations that tomorrow is going to be different, and, well, usually tomorrow looks exactly like today. Inevitably, that motivation just fades. So why does relying purely on our own internal drive always seem to let us down? The answer actually lies in what we call the willpower trap. It turns out relying on brief, intense spurts of motivation and willpower, it's fundamentally flawed. Why? Because both of those are highly limited resources. Just think about it. How many times have you gotten home after a really long, exhausting day of work, dropped your bags at the door, and realized you have absolutely zero willpower left to do all the things you set out to do? Trying harder simply isn't a sustainable strategy for the long haul. Welcome to this explainer on the behavioral science behind human habits. Today we're going to look way past that fleeting feeling of motivation and unpack the actual science of how we change our behavior. We are building a comprehensive, science-backed toolkit for breaking bad habits and wiring in good ones, and we're going to do it by completely bypassing the need for raw willpower. Think of our agenda today as basically a step-by-step masterclass in behavioral science. We're covering 1, the willpower trap, 2, rewiring the mind, 3, designing your environment, 4, reversing deep-rooted habits, and 5, the timeline of change. All right, let's jump straight into section 1, the willpower trap. We're going to start by looking at a completely fascinating piece of research by Dan Ariely and Klaus Wertenbrock on the exact nature of procrastination and how we try to use pre-commitment to stop it. Check out this proofreading study. Participants were actually paid for finding errors, but penalized for late submissions. The researchers split folks into 3 groups. One group had externally imposed, evenly spaced deadlines. The second group could self-impose their own deadlines. And the third group, everything was just due right at the very end. And the results are pretty wild. The evenly spaced externally imposed deadlines yielded the absolute highest performance. The self-imposed deadlines, they sat right in the middle. And that end deadline group performed the worst by far. So the absolutely crucial takeaway here is this. We actually have a ton of self-awareness. People willingly impose costly deadlines on themselves because they know they have a self-control problem. We recognize that we need to, chain ourselves to a deadline. But here's the kicker. We rarely lock the padlock tight enough on our own. Now, while these self-imposed deadlines definitely help control procrastination compared to having no deadlines at all, they just aren't optimal. We simply don't set the strictest, most effective constraints for ourselves when we're left to our own devices. We need a better toolkit. Which brings us to section 2, rewiring the mind. To rewrite our mental code, we're looking at some incredible insights from the Sweet Institute on Cognitive Behavioral Therapy, or CBT, which offers us a seriously powerful framework for cultivating new behaviors. CBT introduces us to the ABC model. Therapists use this to help you map out your patterns, because you see, behavior isn't just a single isolated act, it's a cycle. First comes the antecedent. That's the trigger or cue in your environment. Then comes the behavior itself. And finally, the consequence. By mapping this out, it's like a giant puzzle coming together. You can see exactly what sets off your actions and what reinforces them. Now, notice this internal dialogue. These kinds of thoughts literally destroy habits before they even form. CBT focuses heavily on identifying limiting beliefs and cognitive distortions, things like all or nothing thinking. When you have thoughts like, I always quit, or I'm just not disciplined, it causes us to self-sabotage right out of the gate. You have to learn to challenge the accuracy of these automatic, knee-jerk thoughts and generate self-affirming alternatives so you can learn to tolerate a little imperfection. Furthermore, if you want to build actual, unstoppable momentum, your motivation must be rooted in personal meaning. If it's just based on external pressure, it's not going to stick. The real strategy here is to align your core values with micro habits. For example, instead of committing to writing an entire novel, just commit to journaling for 2 minutes. You use something called habit stacking, basically saying, okay, after I brush my teeth, I will joyfully journal for 2 minutes. This effortlessly transitions you from these stressful, avoidance-based cycles over to value-based, goal-directed actions. Okay, section 3, designing your environment. Shifting from the mind to the physical world, let's explore how manipulating your surroundings literally automates good behavior. This is the part where we stop relying on willpower entirely. These are James Clear's foundational rules from his Habits cheat sheet. If you want to build a habit, you absolutely must make it obvious, attractive, easy, and satisfying. The core environmental design concept here is to look at your space in terms of the number of steps it takes to actually perform a habit. You kind of have to turn the walls into slides, right? You want to drastically reduce the steps it takes to do the good habits. Notice the super powerful contrast here. If you want to work out more, you decrease friction, right? You put your gym clothes right next to your bed the night before. But for bad habits, you do the exact opposite. You massively increase the friction. If you want to eat less junk food, don't just put it in a kitchen drawer. Put it in a metaphorical safe. Actually, better yet, don't even have it in your house at all. That literally forces you to have to go outside and travel if you really want a sugar hit. Make the cues for bad habits completely invisible, and the cues for good habits glaringly obvious. And this extends directly to your focus and creativity too. Using physical items like custom engraved pens places a persistent visual cue right in your environment. It acts as a physical placeholder for your memory. Whether it's laying out your cooking ingredients mise en place style, which just means everything is in its proper place before you start, or standardizing your desk space, environmental design completely externalizes your thinking, and that frees up a ton of your mental bandwidth for actual high-level creative problem solving. Moving on to Section 4, reversing deep-rooted habits. But what about the truly severe, deeply entrenched behaviors? We're talking about things like chronic nail biting, skin picking, or even physical tics that feel completely automatic and honestly impossible to break. Well, this is where habit reversal training, or HRT, comes in. Developed back in the 1970s by psychologists Ezrin and Nunn, it is a highly effective, multi-component behavioral treatment. A major, key pillar of HRT is awareness training. Specifically, it teaches you to recognize what's called the premonitory urge. That is that very specific building physical sensation, that tension that occurs just milliseconds before the habit actually takes over. Once you can successfully identify that premonitory urge, the treatment relies heavily on executing a competing response. So when the urge strikes, instead of just performing the old habit, you intentionally grab a stress ball, or you engage in a competing physical movement that makes the old habit literally impossible to do at the exact same time. And research consistently shows this produces massive effect sizes in reducing these deeply ingrained behaviors. Finally, Section 5, the timeline of change. Let's look at how all of this builds into the reality of time, and let's manage our expectations for true, lasting transformation. Like, how long is this whole thing actually going to take? Okay, first things first, it is time to completely forget the popular myth that it only takes 21 days to form a habit. No way. This totally arbitrary number actually stems from a 1960 book called Psycho-Cybernetics by Maxwell Maltz. Maltz was actually a plastic surgeon who simply observed that it took his patients about 21 days to get used to their new faces in the mirror. Yeah, you heard that right. Our entire culture based a massive foundational self-help rule on plastic surgery recovery times. It wasn't based on rigorous behavioral science at all. Science actually tells a very different story. A comprehensive study from University College London examined people over 12 weeks and found that it takes an average of 66 days to wire in a new habit. And honestly, that time frame varies wildly. It can range anywhere from 18 days to over 250 days. It depends entirely on your motivation, your current circumstances, and the specific complexity of the habit you're trying to build. And when it comes to breaking an old habit, experts are quick to point out that the old pattern never truly vanishes. Those neural pathways, they're still lingering right there in your brain. So if you're struggling, please hear this. It is not a moral failing. It's just neurological lingering. Your goal is simply to practice the replacement behavior so consistently that it becomes the new dominant neural pathway. This is exactly why replacing a habit is infinitely more effective than just trying to stop one cold turkey. You really don't need endless willpower to change your life. You just need the right mechanics. So I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. Grab this toolkit we just walked through, take a hard look at your own surroundings right now, and pick just one single small friction point to either remove or add today. What is one barrier you can eliminate right now to start engineering your own success?